The purpose here is to help our students to they are right now most of our students are currently in the stage of proposal defense. So I hope this program is very. So without further ado, let me welcome our resource person today, Dr. Prabhashini Wijewantha from the Department of Human Resources Management from University of Kelaniya. So thank you, Dr. Prabhashini, for accepting our invitation and coming, joining the session, and all your support, in the future sessions as well, to introducing some resource persons. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I would like to invite Dhanushika, a student from YRC board, so to formally, officially welcome our resource person. And I invite our students to make the best use of this opportunity, and happy learning to everyone. So thank you. Over to Dhanushika.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Research is not only about finding answers, but also about asking the right questions and turning ideas into the meaningful results. It is my great pleasure to warmly welcome you all to the Research Workshop series organized by the Young Researchers Circle. I am very happy to see all of you here today. Today's session is on from concept to measure, conceptualization, operationalization, and research design in quantitative research. This topic is very important for anyone doing research because it helps us turn our idea into a clear and measurable results and design our studies in a proper way. It is my honor to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Prabhashini Wijewantha. She is a senior lecturer in the Department of Human Resource Management at the University of Kelaniya. She has a strong academic qualification. She holds a PhD from Management Science, University of Malaysia, and MBA from the University of Colombo, and BSc degree in Human Resource Management from the University of Sri Jayawardenepura. She is also an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, Sri Lanka. With her knowledge and experience, we are very fortunate to have her with us today. I am sure this session will be very useful for all of us in our research journey. Without taking a more time, I would like to invite Dr. Prabhashini Wijewantha to begin our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dhanushika and Dr. Tarindu both, for those warm welcome notes and the introduction. And also thank you very much for having me and giving me this opportunity to liaise with the young researchers of the NSBM Green University. So let me see whether I can share my screen. I need your support by letting me know whether you all can see my screen. I put the presentation on slideshow mode. Can you all just tell me whether you can see the slides?
Yes, Doctor. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, so then we will start the session. So as both Tarindu and Dhanushika mentioned, I am Dr. Prabhashini Wijewantha. I'm working as a senior lecturer attached to the Department of Human Resource Management, Faculty of Commerce and Management Studies at University of Kelaniya. So being a quantitative, being an academic, we all engage or we all have to engage in research. Similarly, being undergraduates, you also have to engage in research. So when undertaking research, the researchers take different paths based on their comfortabilities and preferences. So today's focus is more towards quantitative research. Usually, there are three methodologies through which you can do research. The first one is the quantitative research. The second one is qualitative research. And the third one is where you combine both and have a mixed methods approach. So here today during today's discussion, we are going to discuss about quantitative research, and in the subsequent discussions or workshops, you will learn about qualitative research and mixed methods research. And remember the previous two workshops, the first one done by Dr. Tarindu on identifying the research problem and establishing the research questions, and the literature review workshop done by Dr. Michelle lays the foundation for the today's conversation and the subsequent conversations. Now, if I just recall what you have discussed in the previous couple of discussions, in the first discussion with Dr. Tarindu, you have already established the research problem, or you have identified the research problem. And now you are going to explain that research problem using theoretical support and prior empirical literature. So for that purpose, you have already established the research questions and the research objectives. So now, then, when you are establishing the research problem and the research questions and the objectives, after you see the problem in the practice or in our environment, you have identified it as a concept. Now, for an example, you observe that the employees working in most of the executive level employees working in private sector organizations, both in Sri Lanka and in the world, are highly stressed out. They are experiencing stress, burnout, emotional exhaustion, and their well-being is at a lower level. So then you identify a concept out of that. Let's say you might identify employee well-being, or you might identify burnout, or you might identify stress, or you might identify emotional exhaustion. So now you have identified the problem, where the problem is, and that problem has been converted into a concept as low employee well-being or high job stress. And then now, when you are establishing the research questions, you are going to see how you can explain this problem using prior theories and prior empirical literature. So by going through theories and going through literature, you have identified that one of the problems for low employee well-being could be organizational politics. So then that is where people telling tales to the boss giving favorized treatment to some employees. Then as you see that issue, and when you come to literature, you figure out that this variable is referred to as, or this is referred as a concept as per organizational politics. So then you establish a research question to identify what is the impact of organizational politics on employee well-being. So then you identify the related research objective for that as to identify the impact of organizational politics on employee well-being. So like that, now you have identified the concepts related to your research. So then we are going to draw the conceptual framework and develop the hypothesis, and that is what we call conceptualization. The drawing of the conceptual framework and the hypothesis with the support of theories and prior empirical literature. Then, after identifying the concepts and drawing the conceptual framework and establishing the hypothesis, you have to measure them. So now you are going to operationalization. So operationalization refers to converting the concepts you identified in the research questions, research objectives, the conceptual framework, and the hypothesis into measurable constructs. And then after converting them to a measurable definition and a measurable scale, you design your research by designing the research method, the questionnaires, and the sample. So these are the areas that we are going to cover during today's conversation. Right, so I've listed out them here as well again by dissecting the topic into point form. So first we are going to see what is conceptualization. Then through conceptualization, we will identify the variables in the conceptual model. What is an independent variable? What is a dependent variable? What is a mediator? What is a moderator? Like that. Then we will move on to develop the conceptual model or the conceptual framework. And then we will move on to the operationalization. So under operationalization, we will discuss about how can we convert the variables into a measurable state, or how can you measure the variables. Then we will move on to questionnaire design, because in quantitative design, we measure variables, and then to collect data, primary data, we usually use questionnaires. And then we will discuss about designing the research in a quantitative study and how can you design the sample in a quantitative study. So we'll start with what is conceptualization. So conceptualization is converting something that you see around you in the environment into a definitive concept. So conceptualization is the process of converting a set of abstract ideas into a set of definitive concepts and thereafter to a conceptual framework enabling to understand the complex phenomenon being dealt with. So, in an organization, we observe something that is called the phenomenon or Sansiddhya in Sinhala, what is under observation or what you are dealing with. So, the phenomenon or the event or the incident that you are dealing with could be the employees leaving the organization, high employee turnover, and there are also at the same time employees staying in the organization. So we are looking at the complex or the complicated phenomenon or incident of employees leaving the organization, or why then when a large number of employees leave, why a certain set of employees stay. Something like that. So now we want to understand this complex phenomenon. So since it's complex, it's uncomfortable or difficult for us to understand that. So to enable us to understand this, we have to simplify this complex phenomenon. So how are we going to do that? We are going to convert this set of abstract ideas into a set of definitive concepts and a conceptual framework. So you can't just do it. You have to follow a process. First, we have to see what is the term that we can use to refer to the complex phenomenon we are dealing with. So now, there are quite a large number of employees leaving the organization and there is high employee turnover. And that is the problem that we are encountering. So that is the research problem. Then as we see it, we also see some employees are still staying in the organization. So then we are trying to see why they are actually staying. What are the positive aspects of our organization for them to stay? So then we read literature related to employees staying in organizations and leaving organizations. And then we figure out when employees are leaving, that is defined as their intention to leave or intention to quit. That is, in the near future, they would quit the organization. And then it converts to employee turnover. And similarly, when the employees are willing to stay, that is called intention to stay. Then we think, we use our brains and brainstorm and see what actually do I want to study. Is it whether about employees leaving or staying? Then now I decided that I want to study that why employees stay amidst the opportunities around them to leave. So then accordingly, I identify that variable as intention to stay. So that is the definitive concept now. Then now I read literature mainly related to intention to stay, but I also read at the same time the literature related to intention to leave or intention to quit and also employee turnover. Then when I read literature, I figure out that the scholars have studied different variables affecting intention to stay. So then they are the other definitive concepts. So then they have converted those abstract ideas into those concepts. So then one of those concepts or definitive ideas is perceived supervisor support. So then I take those two concepts and draw a conceptual framework. So that is basically what we call conceptualization, the process of converting a set of abstract ideas. Like for an example, the bosses support. Why do they stay those ideas into a set of definitive concepts? Intention to stay, perceived supervisor support. And then we draw a conceptual framework. So this is a very basic conceptual framework that I have drawn, enabling me as well as the viewers and the readers to understand the complex phenomenon that is employee turnover, employees leaving, employees thinking of staying. That is the complex phenomenon being dealt with. So for an example, we want to find whether the boss's support, the immediate line manager's support influences the intention of employees to stay or leave a job. That is an abstract idea. So then we converted it into definitive concepts as perceived supervisor support and employee intention to stay, and we drew this very simple conceptual framework. So then at which point do we do this exercise, or at which point do we conceptualize? After clearly defining the research problem, after forming the research questions. Next, you form the conceptual framework using the theoretical and empirical support. So first thing that you do as you enter into do a research is to clearly define the research problem. And then you form the research questions. And then you try to draw the conceptual framework using the theoretical and empirical support. So that is the point where we conceptualize. Then why do you do it at that point? Because there is a strong relationship between research questions and the research problem, the research objectives, and the conceptualization. So after establishing the research problem, your research questions should lead to explain the research problem. Then your research questions should identify the key issues that contributes to the research problem. That is, you have to identify how the problem is constructed by different interrelated components. And then you draw the conceptual framework relating those different interrelated components and the research problem. So then the conceptual framework will reflect the relationships proposed in the research questions and the research objectives. So then usually when I teach my students about preparing the research proposal, I will show you a document that I prepare first with my students. Then that will also help you to go forward in preparing your research problem and also the research proposal. So before we go ahead, can somebody tell me whether you all are clear with what we've discussed so far, or whether you all have any questions? Are we clear? Are we clear with what we've discussed so far, or any questions?
Clear, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So then can you all now see my screen where I am showing a Word document? Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
The Word document that I am sharing is visible, right? Right. So then this is a document that I get my research students when as soon as they come for supervision, I get them to fill this document. This is, I call this the thesis master document. So first, we try to establish the research title or on what are they doing the research. And then we establish the research title. So for that, I get them to go through quite a number of research articles. After they go through the research articles and decide upon the research area, we establish the research title. So for an example, you could see in this study, for this student, we established this research title. So this student looked at impact of perceived supervisor support and task clarity on internship satisfaction, the moderating effect of work-life balance. It was a study of final year undergraduates of management faculties in state universities in Sri Lanka. So then, after identifying the research title, we moved on to establish the research problem. So we covered the whole aspect of the study in the research problem and established it as a question. So after going through literature, we identified the problem before writing the chapter 1 or the background of the study question, background of the study section or the research problem explanation. We just formed the research problem as a question here. So our research problem is, what is the impact of perceived supervisor support and task clarity on the internship satisfaction with the moderating effect of work-life balance of the final year management undergraduates in state universities in Sri Lanka? So then, based on this research problem, we identified the research questions separately. For this also, we went through literature or research articles. So then we identified that our first question is going to be, what is the impact of perceived supervisor support on internship satisfaction of the final year undergraduates of management faculties in state universities in Sri Lanka? Then our second question was, what is the impact of task clarity on internship satisfaction of the final year undergraduates of management faculties in state universities in Sri Lanka? And thereafter, we brought in the moderation effect. Here we are testing two moderation effects. Does work-life balance moderate the relationship between perceived supervisor support and internship satisfaction? Does work-life balance moderate the relationship between task clarity and internship satisfaction? So then, accordingly, we established the 4 research objectives in line with the research questions. So I'm not going to repeat them again because they are the same, but we've presented them in an affirmative form. These are actually not questions, right? These are just statements. Then we moved on to just decide the scope. So we looked at perceived supervisor support and task clarity as 2 independent variables. And the dependent variable is internship satisfaction. And we considered work-life balance as the moderating variable. And the research focused on final year undergraduates because in the management faculties of state universities in Sri Lanka, all the students undergo an internship in their final year. So our population was all the final year undergraduates of faculties of management were in state universities in Sri Lanka. So see, in that manner, we narrowed down our scope. So we are not looking at private universities or non-state universities. We are not looking at other countries. We are looking at only Sri Lanka. And we are only focusing at faculties of management, not about other faculties. And we are also focusing only the undergraduates of the final year, the last year. And we are focusing on these 3 variables. Then we drew the conceptual framework. So by this time, we have not written the chapter 1 or the literature review chapter, even though we have gone through the literature, even though we have read the literature. We have just written the topic, written the problem, written the questions, written the objectives, and drawn the framework. So then we drew the conceptual framework based on the research questions and objectives. So we've drawn this using the prior theoretical and empirical literature support. And so this is how we have conceptualized in this study. So now we'll move on to identify the variables in the conceptual framework. So now we are going to draw the conceptual framework. So after identifying the research problem and converting it to a definitive concept, we should remember that it becomes the dependent variable of the study. So that is what we are going to look at. So can somebody tell me if you remember this previous example where we looked at the impact of perceived supervisor support and task clarity on internship satisfaction with the moderating effect of work-life balance. Can you tell me what was the dependent variable or what were we going to look at? කාට හරි කියන්න පුළුවන්ද මට ඒකට ආන්සර් එක? You can make a small guess. So there, the dependent variable is internship satisfaction. Then we look at what are the variables affecting that dependent variable. So then they become the independent variables. So what are the independent variables in our study, if you think? What do you think are the independent variables in that example? Perceived supervisor support, and then task charity. Right? Then there is no mediating variable in the example that I showed earlier in the Word document, but there is a moderating variable. What is a moderating variable? The presence of that variable, if it is high, it creates a particular effect, and if it is low, it creates a different effect. So in that earlier example, the moderating variable is work-life balance. So this is a different conceptual framework. In this variable, can somebody tell me what is the dependent variable? කාට හරි කියන්න පුළුවන්ද මොකද්ද මේ example එකේ dependent variable එක වෙන්නේ කියලා?
Global leadership competencies.
Excellent, thank you. So the dependent variable here is global leadership competencies of high potential subordinates. Then what is the independent variable here?
Line managers, transformational
Excellent,
leadership.
excellent. Line managers, transformational leadership. Thank you. Then how do you refer to this variable, psychological empowerment of high potential subordinates? What is that variable? How do you refer to that?
Mediator.
Excellent, the mediating variable. Then what is supervisor follower fit?
Moderator.
Excellent, very good, very good. So you all know about the variables. So after drawing the conceptual framework, the next task is to develop the hypothesis. So you do that with prior theoretical and empirical support. Then now in words you write the hypothesis, and those hypotheses are reflected in the conceptual framework. So according to this model, the first hypothesis is there is an impact of line managers' transformational leadership on global leadership competencies of high potential subordinates. So that hypothesis is established based on the transformational leadership theory. So now it's not like those days. Nowadays it's easy because after you figure out two variables, now that you want to see which theories support this relationship, you can ask an AI tool like ChatGPT or Cloud. These are the two variables that I am going to relate. What is the best suited theory here, and how can you justify this relationship? Then as it suggests the theories, don't take them blindly because sometimes the AI tools give very silly answers. After they give the solutions, you can read them and get the best theory, select the best theory based on the justification it gives. So similarly, we've established the hypothesis for the mediating effect and the moderating effect using two other theories. You can establish relationships and hypotheses in a conceptual framework using the same theory of multiple theories in a research. So then, now in my as I guide my students, what I do is after drawing the conceptual framework, I also get them to write the hypothesis like this. So now they have not still written the literature review chapter or the chapter 1. We just draw the model and write the hypothesis. But before this, we have read enough literature for this. And thereafter, we move on to operationalization. So after writing the hypothesis, we move on to the operationalization, as we have already concluded the conceptualization. So can you all tell me whether you all have any questions or any clarifications to ask regarding conceptualization? Anything to ask? Or show a reaction, send a reaction based on how you feel at the moment? Send a reaction at least to see, okay. How about the others? Is everyone okay? Right, so then we'll go ahead and move on to the next stage. Now we are going to operationalize. Operationalization. What do the main concepts mean in this research? So now that we have identified the conceptual framework or the main concepts that we are going to focus on, pay attention on, now we are going to find their meanings. Why? Because we need to include their meanings in the research. Now say something like this. I am studying the impact of job embeddedness on intention to stay. Then as I talk, nobody knows what is job embeddedness. So I have to explain what it is. What does it mean by job embeddedness? What do the main concepts mean in this research? So then for that, we have to now present the definitions of these variables. And these definitions we select at the operationalization stage are called the operational definitions or the working definitions. The operational definition or the working definition is the definition that we will continue throughout. So you can't make a definition here on your own. You have to go through the literature and select the most suitable definition and give the citation with the definition. And as you cite, make sure to cite a scope article published in a Scopus indexed or ABDC listed journal. So then, or else you can take 2 or 3 definitions and develop your own based on these articles, or cite the articles and then say that based on them you came up with this definition. So that definition is called the working definition or the operational definitions of variables. So next, what I get my students to do is to write the operational definitions or working definitions of variables. So here you would see for the four main variables, this student has presented the definitions. In this document, So we've not written any chapter yet. Now we are going to go to the next task. Then, now that we are doing a quantitative research, we have to measure these main concepts. So then, to measure these concepts, we have to translate or convert these concepts into tangible indicators of their existence. These indicate the combination of these indicators will tell us that this concept is present in this setting. Now, for an example, when you take perceived supervisor support, which is our concept. Now we have to ask from an employee whether your supervisor is supporting you. So to see that, you ask a set of questions. Is your supervisor giving instructions on how to do the work? Is your supervisor nice when you are facing problems? Is your supervisor able to approach when you are at work? So those are the tangible indicators taken together will indicate the existence of the concept of perceived supervisor support. Then we can use this operationalization to test the conceptual model by measuring the variables. So for that purpose, we now design the operationalization table. So next, I will show you the operationalization table. So next task that we have to do is to develop the operationalization table, which will help us to measure a concept using these measurable indicators or items. So this is the variable perceived supervisor support. So I can't think of the measurable indicators that I am going to use. I have to go to previous research and find out what are the measurable indicators used by previous researchers to measure this variable. Then we go to research articles, and in the measure section, you get this information about the variables, and then based on that, you develop this operationalization table by mentioning the name of the variable. So if you take this article, which I will show you, this article, Factors Influencing Internship Satisfaction Among Students. So in this article, it says, under the method section, the measures. So then they first define the variables. Supervisor support refers to the extent to which work supervisors care about the intern's well-being and provide helpful and constructive feedback to enrich interns' experiences. So we take this as the definition the working definition or the operational definition of our variable and cite these authors, To and Lang. Then they say 3 items were adapted from Bienen's and Wenn's studies. So then we'll see whether they've given the items here. Yes. So then they say 3 items were used, taken from Bienen and Wenn's study, and these are the 3 items that are indicators that they have used to measure the variable supervisor support. So we are taking these 3 items and we are including it in that table. Here now I've not taken those 3. We've taken a different scale. So if it was this one. Now here we've taken a 16-item different scale. So like anyway, you put those items here. Then now if we used these 3 items which I mentioned in that previous article, the measurement source would be, as mentioned here, Bienen 2007 and Wenn 2010 as cited in To and Lang 2020. So that is how you would cite it. But here this student has taken from a different source. So we've mentioned that source. And here you mentioned the number of items, whether it's 2, 3, 16, like that. And for the next variable also, you see now the task, they have measured task clarity. They have defined it and said 5 items. They have taken 5 items. So we'll see their 5 items at the end. So here are the 5 items that they have taken. So here in this variable, they say, in this model, they've taken the 5-point Likert scale for all items. So in the operationalization table, you mention that you take the 5 items, that they have taken the 5-point Likert scales. So like this, you prepare the operationalization table for all variables in your conceptual framework before you write the chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, etc. Because then you can find out whether there are well accepted, previously validated standard scales to measure the variables. If they are not there, there is no point in going forward with your research. So therefore, after preparing this document and finishing it, I ask my students to start writing the chapters and they can start collecting data after preparing this document. And while the data is being collected in the questionnaire, for the questionnaire, they write the chapters so that you can save time as well. So now with that, we've concluded the second segment of our conversation today, which is operationalization. Are we clear on that? Or any questions? anything that you want to ask. Can you show a reaction to see whether you all are clear with what we've discussed? How about the others? Are we okay? Right. Great. Thank you. Then we'll move on to the research design. So when it comes to quantitative studies, you do that within the positivistic research philosophy. And the research is undertaken as a quantitative study, and most of the quantitative studies follow the survey strategy. It's a strategy where it involves the collection of data. Here you collect primary data. Usually in research, we use two types of data: primary data and secondary data. What is primary data? Primary data are the data that you collect for the purpose of this particular study. Whereas secondary data is the data that we collect that has been already collected, which we use for our study. So usually we do surveys to collect primary data. Under this strategy, we collect data from a sizable population or a population of a particular size. So the most common tool that we use to collect data from a survey and for a quantitative research using the survey strategy is questionnaires. So then next thing is to develop a questionnaire. So after you prepare the operationalization table, you can easily prepare the questionnaire. Right? So I will show you a sample questionnaire now. Can you see the questionnaire on the screen? So this is a sample questionnaire. In the first section, you present the first variable. You mention the name of the variable and the instructions and the Likert scale and the items. So these items are all not constructed by you and I. These are taken from well accepted, previously validated standard scales. So then comes the second variable in another page. So here we divide the sections as section AB so that it's easy for us to enter the data to the data sheet. Here it's the section C, and then this is the section D, and last we include the demographic details. So under that you put the demographic details that are relevant for the study, and thereafter thank the respondent for their cooperation. So a questionnaire is one form of data collection. It's a technique or a tool used in the survey strategy. So there are two types of questionnaires. The first one is self-administered questionnaires. That is where I share the questionnaire with the respondent and they themselves fill it and either hand it over to me or submit the online questionnaire. So there, the respondent themselves is filling the questionnaire. Or there could be interviewer administered questionnaires. For an example, now if you are doing this in the plantation community, some of the plantation workers may not be ready to read or write. Sometimes they cannot write. So they may be not illiterate populations. Then you go to them and you ask the questions verbally and get them to give the answer like ඔයා ඔබගේ ප්‍රධානියා ගැන ඔබ තෘප්තිමත්ද? 1 සිට 7 දක්වා ස්කේල් එකක ඔබේ ප්‍රධානියා ගැන ඔබට වෙන තෘප්තිමත් භාවය ඔබ සනිටුහන් කරන්නේ කොතනද? So then they would say it's 3. Then we would mark or circle 3 in the questionnaire. So such questionnaires are called interviewer administered questionnaires. Then the next one is, so when it comes to self-administered questionnaires, we can print them after preparing the questionnaire in the Word document. You can print them and post them to the respondent with their address. So if you are posting them, you have to also mention how you are going to collect it back. Whether you are going there to collect it or whether you expect them to post the duly filled questionnaire back to you. So if you expect them to fill and send you back the duly filled questionnaire, you have to also attach a self-addressed envelope, stamped envelope, or else you can hand deliver the hard copy and get them to fill it, and after some time you can again go back and collect it. Or else you can email them the questionnaire as a document so that they can fill it and send it back to you as an email attachment. But nowadays, what we mostly do is we use online questionnaires or Google Forms, or there are survey platforms like, SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics. Then, when you use these online questionnaires, the ease about them is that it saves time, energy and money of yours to go to them and collect them and get back. And also they would fill it and immediately they can submit them. And also at the same time, they gets automatically fed into the Google Sheet or an Excel sheet, making your analysis easy. But you can, whether you use an online questionnaire or a hard copy questionnaire depends on the population of your study. Because if the population says is unable to access to the e-resources, like let's say blue collar workers, something like that, then you have to anyway use hard copy questionnaires. But if you are dealing with executive staff, then you can use soft copy questionnaires. Then, how would you decide the type and mode based on that? And also, along with the cover letter, you need to also prepare, along with the questionnaire, you need to also prepare the cover letter and the company permission letter. So I will show you a sample cover letter. So this is sample cover letter I share with my students so that it's easy for them. So they fill in this information as necessary and then share the questionnaire along with this cover letter, and then you can attach the cover letter to the questionnaire and send. So the cover letter will provide a brief overview of what the questionnaire and the study is all about. I hope you can see me and I am audible.
Yes, doctor. Yes.
Okay, I think something went wrong suddenly with the connection. So I've shown you the cover letter of the questionnaire, and you can use that cover letter. You need to use a cover letter alongside the questionnaire, irrespective of whether you send it as a hard copy, soft copy, or a Google form. Apart from that, if you are collecting data from employees in a company, you have to send a letter to that company introducing your study and requesting permission to collect data from the employees of the organization. And this is a sample company permission letter that I share with the students to use in their studies. So along with the company permission letter and the cover letter, you share the questionnaire. And then you can collect data for the questionnaire. So when preparing the questionnaire, I told you all that you need to use the scales. You need to develop the questionnaires using measures or measurement scales which are well accepted, previously validated standard scales. So never try to develop questions by yourselves. And as you go to search the questionnaires, always use the journals which are published in well accepted standard journals. And as you try to find the multiple items, when you find measures, find scales or measures which have multiple items. Though it's acceptable to use single item measures, in Sri Lanka, they say at least we need to have 5 items to get a genuine response from the respondents.